Ooh. All right. Welcome to another movie review stream. I actually got new lighting this time, a little bit more moody, I guess. I'm trying out a bunch of different settings with it. All right, so for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, my name is Mark McPherson. I'm a film critic for filminquiry.com, TwinCitiesGeek.com, movieswithmark.com, cinemaparadiso.co.uk, and Visual Cult Magazine, as well as cinemaparadiso.co.uk, and a few others. I think I covered some of those. All right, so we actually have quite a few films to cover today on the stream. So we're going to catch up on a few of the latest movies. Some of them I'm just kind of catching up on for the first time, but we're going to be talking about Jordan Peele's new film, Nope, the sci-fi horror film from him. The one that just came out this weekend, DC League of Superpets, the new animated comedy. We'll be talking about Not Okay, a social media thriller, I guess you could kind of call it. Well, I'll explain it. We'll also be talking about what I've been looking forward to for a very long time. You might actually notice it's on the shelf behind me. On the very top row there is Crimes of the Future, which is a film I've been waiting for the longest time to get, and I finally got the distributor to actually send me a copy, so we're finally going to review that one. And then we'll also be talking about Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank, which is an animated comedy that came out a few weeks ago, and if you have not heard of it, you will not believe what it's based on, so I'll save that for later. Okay, so let me get up my notes here for our first film today. Get up all my notes. And of course, we'll talk about the big blockbuster right now, of course, which is Nope. The aptly titled Nope. Alright, so let's set it up here in 3, 2, 1. So Jordan Peele's Nope is the third film in his and it's basically his kind of like saga of horror. It's debatable if it's kind of horror. I mean, it may be leaning more towards like social horror with his other films like Get Out and Us. Nope, I think might actually be my favorite Jordan Peele film now. Just because I think everything about Nope is just bigger. Like for one, like it has a way bigger scope in terms of like the themes it's trying to touch on, as well as the setting that it's placed within. In addition to like the visual effects, like the visual effects here are far more grand than they've been in the previous films. And I feel like it kind of works here because like a lot of people, like I love the marketing for Nope. Like they were very vague about what this film was going to be about. It's just like people looking up towards the sky. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's going to be aliens. Then, of course, we got more posters and trailers, and it started to reveal, oh, yeah, it's going to be an alien film. Now, thankfully, like, at first, I was a little bit hesitant because, like, alien films, especially, like, alien horror films, tend to usually, you know, they fall into, like, you know, one of two paths, which is, like, what do the aliens want from us? They want to either eat us or they want to meet us. So, you know, either E.T. or Mars Attacks, that type of deal. And you could technically place Nope into this type of, you know, into this little bit of a binary. You could actually choose one. That being said, it becomes, I love how the story becomes more than just, you know, what are the aliens trying to do? Like, there's a bigger theme here. And I think it works mostly because, like, I mean, for one, like, the cast is amazing here. You have Daniel Kaluuya playing Otis Jr., or as he prefers to be called, OJ, and yes, they make a little winking joke about it. And OJ basically runs this Hollywood ranch. He's inherited this ranch from his father, who's run a ranch of horses that appear in like movies and television commercials. So he takes over the ranch, and the ranch is not doing well. He's trying to make it work, but he's struggling to just make a profit. Like, he ends up selling a lot of horses, but he wants to buy them back because it's really important to his legacy. And Kaluuya is very, like, I mean, like, he always does this so well, but he has this very understated performance where, like, he can just make you smile just from, like, the smallest things with him. Like, he has the ability to be both intimidating and comical with so little, which makes him such like a perfect actor. And I think he's definitely at his finest here. Like, he's very subdued, he's very quiet. He keeps very much to himself, even though, you know, he's in a business where he's really got to hustle a bit. So you would think that he'd get a little bit of backup from his sister who gets involved, Emerald, played by Kiki Palmer, and she is just like the polar opposite of OJ. She's eccentric. She's very talkative. She's got a lot of energy, but she's also not as focused on the ranch as OJ is. So she's basically, like I said, the polar opposite, which makes them have the perfect chemistry. Like anytime they're together on screen, it's just wonderful to see their back and forth, the way that like M just wants to insert herself into every conversation and OJ just kind of casually trying to push her back. They have a perfect dynamic there that even when it gets to the point where they actually see eye to eye and actually connect, it works so well because you just know like they're like that brother and sister who grew up just feuding with each other but would always come together when the chips are down. So they face their biggest challenge when the ranch starts having horses go missing, and they're not quite sure why it's happening until they start seeing something up in the sky. And they're not quite sure what it is, but it's hiding behind clouds, and it's sucking up the horses. Now, eventually, I'm not sure how much of a spoiler it would be at this point, but they eventually discover a little bit more about this UFO that's basically stalking their ranch. But they realize that, there's... Okay, so they figure out that there's a UFO on their ranch. What do they want to do with it? The number one thing that M wants to do is she wants to get footage of it. And not just any footage, but like the perfect footage. Not that kind of like blurry and, like the intentional shaky cam stuff that they throw up on YouTube. She wants to find that perfect shot. And this becomes part of like the general theme of the film, is this focus on the eyeballs, and this was kind of a little bit of like a focus in like in the previous film Us, where you had like a bit of those like dioptic shots where they were like really close in the eyes. But this film, much like Get Out and Us, like it always feels like there's a moment in Jordan Peele's films where they perfectly identify who the antagonist is and what they want and what they represent. It's kind of like how Nicholas Winding Refn once said that there's always that one scene that defines what a film is about. So for like in Get Out, I would say that scene would probably be where Stephen Root's character basically says that he wants, what black people have and doesn't really care how they get it. So basically, yeah, like they assure you right from that scene that, yeah, this is a commentary on like, systemic racism. And then you get into a film like Us, where, like they have that very blatant moment where they ask like the doppelgangers, who are you? And they say, we're Americans. And it becomes obvious then. There's a scene in Nope where they basically identify the UFO as the viewer. And this got me really intrigued because with Get Out and Nope, once you get to those scenes, it becomes pretty obvious like what the film is trying to say. But when you get to the scene where they identify the UFO as the viewer, which becomes like much more literal as a representation of a camera, the closer and closer they get to this alien, it becomes far more fascinating to explore. And it's even more interesting when you get the other characters involved here. Like you have Steven Yeun playing this ridiculous child actor growing up called Ricky, who they established worked on like a sitcom called Gordy that involved I believe it's like a chimpanzee they had on the set, and the animals just went nuts and killed a bunch of people. And because they weren't able to maintain it, he basically grew up with this trauma. But Ricky is also aware of the UFO and tries to reason with it in the same way that it reasons with Gordy. So you have like this more interesting element, I think, of like this overlapping theme of control as well. So it's all a matter of like, who is in control here and who is the viewer. And the UFO kind of basically wants both. It wants to be entertained. It wants, basically it wants blood. It's kind of like a much more subtle commentary on horror films in the same way that Cabin in the Woods was. Like Cabin in the Woods was very much a bit of like an on-the-nose satire, or maybe a little bit of a roast if you want to think of it that way, of the desires of the horror audience and even horror producers. And the UFO actually functions the same way, but in a much more subtle way. Which makes for the perfect timing of like the catchphrase of the film. Like if you were hoping that there was a scene in the film where Daniel Kaluuya's character basically looks up at the UFO and basically says, "No, I'm not playing this game. That happens in there." And there's a perfect moment here where it's just like nothing happens here, and it's meant to be both. It's tense and comical at the same time because, for one thing, it's a smart move that he's doing, and at the same time, it's hilarious because you're seeing this character actually show some smarts within a horror situation. Because typically, when you're watching a horror film like this, you want characters to make stupid decisions. You might think you don't, but you do. You want to have that moment where like there is terror and horror and blood and guts on the screen, and that usually happens if a character makes a mistake. And these characters are trying not to make mistakes, but they're also dealing with a threat that they don't quite know how to deal with. Specifically, like they just want like a shot of it. Like they want, like I said, they want the perfect shot. Destruction of the UFO will come later. But you have just like an amazing cast who contributes here as well. Like there's a few more characters here. You have Brandon Perea, I think I'm pronouncing it right. He plays Angel, who is a Fry's employee who basically has nothing going on. He obsesses over ancient aliens, so he kind of becomes like the not like he's a little bit of the tech geek, but more of like, you know, the alien conspiracist. You know, this type of character. And Brandon could have just played this like just very simple, because like, you know, he's supposed to be like a bit of like the, you know, not too smart comic relief, like the character who thinks he knows everything but kind of doesn't. Like he might know too much of something not important for this type of scenario. But he works here. Like he's pretty adorable in the way that he wants to like insert himself, and the way that both like OJ and M keep trying to like push him out of the scene. Like, yes, everything's set up. We don't need you anymore. It's like, oh, you guys sure? And you kind of feel for him a little bit because like it's a smart move. You don't want to get him too involved because he's going to get really nutty about it. But then you also have Michael Wincott playing the cinematographer who takes an interest in it as well. And just Wincott has like the most sultry, amazing voice that anytime he's on screen, or even just like one of the bigger scenes he has is over the phone, and just hearing his voice, just any scene with him is just a treat for the ears. And I haven't mentioned it because he's not in the film as much, but you also have Keith David playing OJ's father, which, I mean, do I have to say anything? Keith David is always fun to see. He always is. Like he doesn't quite have as deep a voice as Wincott, but he's got that remarkable voice that you just always love to see. So just everything about the way that the film is shot, and especially the slow build that it has to it. Like there isn't like a mad dash for like the horror here. In fact, you don't really see any like terrifying like blood and guts or like, you know, shocking horror until maybe like 2/3 of the way through the film. Now that might sound like a long time, like, and to be fair, you do actually see a little bit more. You do see some death before that in the form of like mysterious happenings that go on in the sky. But once you get to that moment where you actually see the UFO and its innards, and it's claustrophobic and it's terrifying. Like it was genuinely nightmarish. Like I see tons of horror films, and you know, like, and there is stuff that kind of like scares me at a little bit of a small level, but with Nope, the moment they get to the innards of the UFO, it's just it gave me nightmares. It really did. It is, and I think for that reason alone, it's definitely Peele's most terrifying film for how slowly it builds up to that moment. But while you're building up to that moment, you have these amazing desert shots that are just perfectly shot here, that are just gorgeous to look at. Just like the scope and depth and how they use it, especially during the climax where they use motorcycles and different tech and those wacky waving inflatable tube arm deals. The way they use them across this vast landscape is just beautiful. The commentary here, I think, is much more subtle than Peele's other films, and I think that works really well because it feels like there's a lot to say in this film, and it never has as quite as blunt a moment. Like you can tell a little bit early on, especially from the opening credits, that it's definitely going to have something to do with cameras and the viewer. But it actually explores like quite a bit more than than I would thought, and doesn't hold your hand as much. Like, it's very, especially with Kaluuya's performance, it's very like subdued and kind of like slowly builds up to that. And I think extra credit needs to be given here to Hoyt van Hoytema, the cinematographer, who just makes this film look beautiful, just gorgeous, amazing big shots. We saw this in IMAX, where there was so much IMAX footage in here, and it looks immaculate and gorgeous. I also there's a little bit of like a nod to IMAX in the climax as well. But I think the other important thing to mention here too is that Peele, much like Get Out and Us, he has this amazing ability to just bring up humor when it feels appropriate and just kind of like ease it into like the narrative. It's very much like much more subdued than it was like with Us. There was a lot of humor in it. And with Nope, they're actually like it's got a decent flow. Like, it finds just the right moments to have little tongue-in-cheek humor here and there. That really works. And I think it also helps that it's more ambitious because it feels like a blending of genres here. Like, it's not just a horror film or a sci-fi film, but it's also got this Western angle, especially when you get to the climax, when you have OJ riding a horse and you have like the soundtrack swelling and you have like this, especially when you have like this kind of like Western theme park off to the side here that plays a role in the climax as well. It works really well for that as well. And seeing well a lot, even though, which incidentally enough, well actually plays a pretty big part in this narrative. There's also fun little nods to other films. Like I can't rightly say I've never seen like a perfect recreation of like the Akira motorcycle slide in live action. Like, you've seen it in animation tons of times, but they do a little nod to it in Nope. And I know a lot of people are tired of that Akira reference, which, if you don't know from the movie Akira, there's like that scene where Kaneda just finishes with like this chicken fight and just like skids, and you know the shot, you've seen it a million times. But it still brought a smile to my face just to have that little nod there. So with all that considered, I mean, like, I'd have to rewatch this film just to get a better sense of it, just because I feel like it did have a lasting effect on me, especially when you learn more about the UFO, and especially with like the greater themes of control and the demands of the viewer. But with all things considered right now, I think this is my favorite Jordan Peele film. It's I mean, I've really loved Us and Get Out, but I think I don't want to make it sound just like because I like the fact that it's bigger in terms of like how it was shot. Definitely they had a huger budget for this, if not based on the cinematography, then definitely based on the special effects they used for the UFO. But just like with all things considered, with the thematic elements and the character dynamics, I think Nope is definitely my favorite Peele film by a long shot. Or I guess like by a mile, you know. Do you think the message at the end is that despite our connection to the people in our lives, we can still be distracted by spectacle, with the last shot being the photo at the very end? Kinda. I mean, this might go in a little bit of spoilers here, but I felt like when you got to the ending there, because the ending involves both the UFO being defeated and having a picture taken of it. And the fact that the picture is taken like right before like the big explosion that happens, I feel like there's a commentary on throwing stuff like back at the viewer to basically like challenge the viewer. And I feel like that kind of comes across in the way that you have OJ come back at the end. I feel like, because I feel like when you see OJ come back, a little bit of spoiler, when you see him come back, your first thought is, okay, was this tested so that they didn't? Because like when you see a character come back, you immediately think, okay, did they actually die in the original cut of this film? I would say though, based on the fact that like Peele has a lot of control of his films, I think that was intentional. I feel like it's almost like a challenge to the viewer. And I feel like, in a way, yeah, it's challenging the spectacle, and the distraction of it, but also kind of like throwing it back on you, which is, it's a little bit evident, and I like that they didn't overuse it, which is how OJ uses the mirror that he uses for horses to kind of like distract him. I like that. That's like the perfect element there of like, you know, shining a light back on the viewer. So very much like the satire within within, kind of like within like horror movies, and I think just movies in general. In addition to like the control that a viewer demands from whatever medium they're watching. Um, I don't typically do rating systems, but I think on Letterboxd I did like 4.5 out of 5 stars. So if you really want a rating, if you really want a rating, Mike, I would say 4.5 out of 5 stars. It might, like, we're only about halfway through the year, but I would probably say it has like a spot on my list for the best films of the year right now. Just because I can't stop thinking about it. It's way up there. I mean, like, for sure, the films I know for sure are going to be on my top 10 lists, just because they're going to be at the top, is Everything Everywhere All at Once and RRR. Both those. Perfect films. Cannot stop thinking about them. I love them to death. They are going in at least the top 5. Like, this fall, they better have, like, they're going to have to be, like, amazing films coming out this fall. Which I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying, like, the deck is stacked high at this point. Way, way high. Okay, let's get into our next one here. Let's see. Oh, where's my notes for that? Okay. DC League of Superpets. This one, I will admit, I have a bit of a fondness for, just because I'm more of a DC guy. Hey, Mr. T, how's it going? Just about to review this DC Comics film. Oh, God, hopefully the Snyder bros don't come after me for this one. Yeah, RRR is top there. I'll say this. RRR is definitely going to be the best action film of the year. No question. Like, I'm not even sure how you would preference Everything Everywhere. Like, it's definitely action-based, but it's a lot more... I'd say more sci-fi, I guess. Reference to Chris's friend shows up at the end with this... Oh, yeah, I guess you're kind of right on that. Yeah, I never considered that. That's true, yeah. That's why I'd say, like, this is definitely one of those films I'm going to come back to and watch a few times. Okay. Let's get into it here. So, DC League of Superpets is an animated DC Comics comedy about animals. So, immediately, you're definitely going to get, like, some comparisons here to The Secret Life of Pets. And... like, a little bit of the sad thing is, like, yeah, it does hold some similarities to that. Now, this seems like an easy call for Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers really wants to push more of their animation with their animation division. You know, they've had success with the Lego movie and stuff like that, and Batman Lego movie. So how do you explore more of that with, DC Comics characters? Well, there's a lot you could do with this. There's a lot of material, but... like, focusing on the Superpets is not a bad one. I mean, like, it's a commercially viable one. Like, they've had, like, an animated series for Crypto and all that. So this was, like, a natural call, and I expected my expectations for this were low. Very, very, very low. I just expected basic animal jokes. I knew there would be a heroic mission where Crypto has to prove himself. But I was actually kind of surprised by how much this works. Like, it takes a while to get there, but I think by the end, I kind of actually loved it a little bit more than I thought I would. I'm not deeply in love with the film, but for the premise, I think it works. So, the premise is, after you get through, like, a little bit of Superman's origin, just a bit, not a whole lot, just enough so that you get the whole deal. Crypto is the dog of Superman. Crypto is voiced by Dwayne Johnson, obviously, but... he exists in a world, obviously, where, only the animals can talk to each other and humans don't understand them. Superman is voiced by John Krasinski, and Superman and Crypto, they establish, have a very, very cute relationship. They do everything together, whether it's foiling bank robbers or just playing in the park. Just very, very simple stuff. They have a cute relationship. But it takes Crypto a little while to realize that he might be shoved to the side when Superman decides to ask Lois for his hand in marriage. So the central theme is basically that Crypto needs friends. He needs to realize that he needs more than just Superman to, be his best pal. And this was highlighted both early based on the fact that Krypto doesn't play well with other dogs. It's based on the fact that Krypto doesn't really like the Justice League that shows up. It's like okay, whatever. We got Flash, Wonder Woman, Cyborg, Green Lantern, whatever. Superman's the best and all that. But then you have basically the whole Justice League has been defeated or captured, to make it more palatable for children. They've all been captured by this evil guinea pig, voiced by Kate McKinnon, called Lulu. And she's essentially the evil pet of Lex Luthor. So, of course, she's bald. It's a hairless guinea pig. So Lulu gets the power of basically Superman by having like the orange kryptonite affect her. She kidnaps all the Justice League, and the only hope to save them now is a whole bunch of other super pets who have the same powers that come from the orange kryptonite. But they have much different powers. Unlike apparently, like, you get different powers from the orange kryptonite, but they're kind of random. So Lulu basically gets the power of telekinesis and flight, basically, are like the gist of it. But then you have like a few other characters, like you have Ace, the Hound of like Batman, voiced by Kevin Hart. He can absorb damage. You have a pig that can grow and shrink to any size. You have a squirrel that can shoot lightning. The squirrel, by the way, is Chip, which, if you're familiar with Green Lantern lore, Chip is an actual Green Lantern. And eventually, by the end of the film, he does become one. But it was just a little bizarre that after so many years, we finally get a film with Chip in it. And it's fairly adorable. And then you also have like a super fast turtle, as well as, not as focused on, but there's a cat that can shoot rockets out of its whiskers and its tail, which is kind of cute. Now, for like the first half of the film, it's kind of like fairly standard typical jokes. Like, you see Krypto being jealous, you see him like making all like the typical dog jokes, like, and you get a bit of like a fish out of water story. You have Krypto affected by kryptonite, so you have to learn all the things that dogs learn. It's not a bad setup, but the setup continues on for quite a bit where I'm like, okay, I see where this is going, but it's just kind of like spinning its wheels. Like, it's getting a few witty jabs in here and there, but not as much as I'd like. Like, I'll just say this right off the bat. If you're a parent coming into this and you're hoping for a lot of like DC Comics lore and like kind of in-jokes, the same way that like the Lego Batman movie had a bit of like the Batman humor that a lot of adult fans would get, you're probably not going to get as much of that here. The comedy is definitely better tailored for the kid audience, specifically because there is one scene where they reference Paw Patrol in kind of a mocking manner, and that's one thing that you know that like kids are definitely going to dig on that joke. So but in little bits and pieces here, I think it kind of works. Especially, I like the fact that you have kind of like a more not as like complicated superhero dynamic here. Like, I love the fact that like Superman is just wholesome and adorable and kind of a dork. So I don't know, it feels a while since we've had like a Superman like that in the big screen. So for the few moments where he's actually being kind of sweet with Krypto and also conflicted about his relationship, without being too neurotic about it. Like, I would expect Superman to just kind of be awkward and weird the whole time. But he's actually not. He's actually a pretty sweet guy. I was actually surprised how much I dug Krypto, even though a lot of his humor is just kind of like, kind of falls flat, especially when he tries to adopt a secret identity called Bark Kent. It's just like, all right, kind of a dad joke, but it's not quite working here. I do feel though that by the end of the film, they do find a bit of more of an emotional core, especially even when you have like, they set up very early on that Krypto's gonna have to make a sacrifice by the end of this. But when you get to the end here, the whole theme of like friendship and, realizing that you have to let go of things, I think works really well here. It works well enough that I didn't mind as much of like the corny humor, or like a bit of like the typical like superhero big action ending that they had here. So I feel like most of it works. I mean, you have like a pretty amazing cast here who does like okay jobs with it, even though I have to admit, like, if you want to relate back to like the Secret Life of Pets, there was one of the things I noted about Illumination animation, which this isn't Illumination, just to make that clear, but Illumination always has this way of casting actors who you can't tell that they're doing a voice. Like you could always tell like the casting director would try to make them go out of their element. And there's definitely a lot of actors here who I did not expect to be in these roles. Like Kate McKinnon, I could kind of hear. Like definitely, like you can hear Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart. They have unmistakable voices. But I didn't realize that Keanu Reeves was doing Batman. Like it's not even that obvious because like he's really trying to do like the growls. You kind of got to listen for it. I didn't realize like Mark Maron was doing Lex Luthor, which is very surprising because I've heard Mark Maron do a few animated films before this, and he really does switch it up. I also didn't realize like you had Olivia Wilde as Lois Lane and Jermaine Clements as Aquaman, which that's one of the reasons I love staying for like the credits, just so I could like hear like all the voices. I mean, there are a few ones that you can definitely hear. Like Keith David is Dog L, the dog of Crypto, which I think they get some decent bits out of it. So, like, I mean, overall, like, there's decent bits here and there that work a lot. Like, I'd say maybe half and half. The comedy either falls flat or it's decent enough for the adults. And I'm going to use that preference here for the adults because there's definitely a lot of, like, juvenile humor in here that the kids are really going to love. But ultimately, the bigger emotional core, I feel, really comes together by the end and doesn't feel as kind of, like, rushed at the last minute as, like, some of these films might be. Like, that's the one thing I'd say is the big divergence. Like, Secret Life of Pets was freewheeling. It was all over the place and couldn't figure out what it was trying to do. But League of Super Pets, it definitely knows what it's trying to do. And it does it all right. It does a pretty decent job at it. So there we go. Oh, hey, Actual Phantom. Yeah, good to see you, man. Oh, thank you, Red Samurai Ninja. I'm doing quite well. Actually, I really actually do love your work, Actual Fandom. I love watching your videos. I'm glad to see you're doing more of them, too. Yeah, I'd say it's definitely good to see with your kid. Like, I think, I feel like some kids might be hesitant to it, but I feel like if they see a few clips, they'll really dig on it. The other thing, too, I didn't mention here, and I probably should have, is that I love the fact that they switched up the Green Lanterns here. So like you have like a whole bunch of Green Lanterns you can choose from at this point. Like in terms of like the human ones, like I feel like how many are there has to be at least like 8 human Green Lanterns in like regular rotation, I think. But they actually went with like Jessica Cruz, and I think they actually did a really good job with her design. She's like, it's weird, like the character designs, like they tried to like make them a little bit weird, like stocky and angular, and sometimes it works, sometimes doesn't. I feel like for Superman it works, for Batman it looks a little goofy. I never got into it. Cyborg, they massacred him. They have like the half fro. Aquaman's outfit I didn't really dig. Wonder Woman's okay. You could tell they definitely made him very stocky with like, you know, very like skinny features and very heavy heads, which I feel doesn't work. But they actually like gave Jessica Cruz like a more like filled out body type. Like she didn't look. It's weird. Like the other characters look like rail thin and look kind of like eerie, like they're out of like A Nightmare Before Christmas. But then you look at like Jessica Cruz, it's like, oh, she actually has something that looks closer to reality. So yeah, very mixed bag, I would say, on the character designs. But in terms of storytelling, it's sweet. It's a sweet story. It's fine for kids. Kids need good entertainment, you know? And that's the other thing I got a preference to. Like, I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of adults who are going to rail on this film. They are going to hate it. But I would say definitely get a kid's perspective on this, because kids are probably going to dig this a little bit more. And that's not like saying like definitely kids will like this, but they will definitely probably have more of a preference for it. That's what I'm saying. Mr. T says, I took my parents to see RRR in the theater, and since then they've been watching more indie movies on Netflix. one thing to note about that, Mr. T, is that if they're interested, there's more Indian films playing in theaters too. Pretty consistently. I'd say probably for like the last 5 or 6 years now, we've consistently, in America at least, we've had consistent Indian films. Like, I was just at the theater last week, and I passed by at least two theaters that were playing two Indian films. So there's always at least one. If you go to like the bigger multiplexes, not like because this happens in smaller towns. If you go to the smaller towns where they only have like 5 or 6 theaters, they're going to pick the big ones. But if you go to like a multiplex that has anywhere from like 12 to 18 screens, you're guaranteed to find at least one Indian film there that weekend. So like yeah, at least in my area, if you go to like the Imogene or definitely AMC, I think has them. You'll find them there, which is interesting because you feel like you might have to go to like more like the art house theaters for that kind of stuff. But no, we actually have a lot of Indian cinema, and I think definitely based on like the view bump that I had from RRR, with how many people love it, which I'm not that surprised that it has that much love. I should definitely cover more Indian films. It's not that I don't watch them. It's just that I don't get around to covering as much, just because there's so many. Like there's just as many Indian films to cover at any time as there is American films. Like I said, I go to the theater regularly, and I always see some new Indian film on the marquee there somewhere. So there's a lot to get. Every now and then I catch up with stuff like was that weird one with like the cyborg robot. There's always like a new Indian action film to catch. But yeah, definitely on Netflix. Netflix is a good start. It's a good way to get your feet wet, especially since RRR is already on there as well. So especially if you haven't seen RRR, go check that out. You're missing out on one of the best films of the year. All right. You know what? Since we're going with like the kids' films here, why don't we just keep it going? We'll get to this. This one's a little bit easier to talk about too. Like I'm talking about the easier films. I'm saving the more complicated ones for last, just because they're a little bit trickier to talk about. All right. All right. Just got to get my bearings here. And 3, 2, 1. So, Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank. Now, I knew nothing about this film going in. I assumed it'd just be kind of like a little bit of a fun slapstick, animated samurai hero type film. But as I watched this film, something interesting happened. So, let me start off with the premise here, and let's see if this sounds like a familiar story. So, the story is basically about this version of feudal Japan that's all run by cats. Like, cats are like the dominant species in this world. And you have this town that is under constant attack from bandits. Bandits keep harassing this town, and they don't really have a samurai on hand to push back against these bandits. Now, this town is viewed upon by basically a warlord called Ikachu, voiced by Ricky Gervais, who wants to wipe this town out. But he wants to wipe it out so he can take control of it, but do it in a way so it doesn't seem like he's responsible. So he decides that, I'll make, I'll give like this town a samurai who's so inept that he won't be able to save this town. Like, the town will just be overrun immediately with this guy in charge. So he decides to put in charge of the town a prisoner, a beagle called Hank, voiced by Michael Cera. Now, in this world, cats discriminate against dogs, and Hank was due to be hung. But before his execution, Ikachu decides, I'm not going to kill this guy, and place him in the role of a samurai. Is this story sounding familiar yet? If it doesn't, let me give you an example of the dialogue that happens during that execution. Before the execution happens, Ikachu basically talks to himself and says, I need to find someone who's inept. But who will I find? Who could be that inept at, being a protector that they would fail to protect this town? And why am I asking you? If you guessed Blazing Saddles, you are exactly correct. And And no joke, this film is a remake of Blazing Saddles. No joke. And if you don't believe me, you can check the development history of this. It was at one point going to be named the more explicit title to make this clear, Blazing Samurai. So, and you might be, now at first, like, you might be wondering, okay, well, hang on. A Blazing Saddles remake for kids. And here's the thing. This can, like, and I've kind of thought this in the past, like, I didn't think you could remake Blazing Saddles with the same bite, but I didn't count on the fact that you could make Blazing Saddles if you restructured it to be like a bit of a different film. Because here's the weird thing. Paws of Fury is a different interpretation of Blazing Saddles, but in some bits and pieces here, it's like a direct remake of Blazing Saddles. And what I mean by that is, like, the central story is the same. Like, it definitely has the same themes, the same plot progression, but at the same time, it also has scenes that are just repeating the exact gags of Blazing Saddles verbatim. Like that scene I just described there, that's like a direct verbatim scene from Blazing Saddles, and you'll see a lot of that in I want to say Blazing Samurai just because it sounds more cooler, but Paws of Fury. Yeah, you see a lot of that. And thankfully, though, I do like when the film actually does veer off this, because, like, I was in this mode, like, oh god, okay, it's just going to be all the Blazing Saddle scenes. It's just going to, okay, yeah, I recognize this scene and this character, and you have the muscle come in here, and, you know, you have, like, the discrimination, and, you know, like, the very on-the-nose, like, allegory for, like, you know, racism that's going on here. But I do actually kind of really dig the film in some aspects when it actually veers off this path. And where it veers off is where you have the student-teacher dynamic between Hank, like the amateur samurai, and Jimbo, the accomplished samurai veteran who teaches him, who's voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, which is perfect casting here. And of course, then, you know, you might get the reference there. Jimbo, yo Jimbo, you get it. And of course, like, they have bits and pieces of Blazing Saddles in there. Like, Jimbo's a drunk, just the same way that Gene Wilder's character was a drunk. But they do have a better student-teacher dynamic, where it's not the same scenes, and it actually has a little bit of fun with trying to get Hank to getting used to what it's like to being a cat samurai, even though, you know, they have, like, the divide between species between them. So a little bit of a Zootopia thing going on here. And most of it kind of works. Like, they do have, like, a little bit of, like, the modernization humor. Like, they make jokes about, like, cars, even though cars don't exist, but they try to make them exist in this world. They have jokes about, you know, cats wanting milk, and, like, there's a big like, if you don't like toilet humor, one of the biggest jokes is that the climax takes place at a giant toilet. So, just warning you there. And it's weird, like, I go back and forth on this film, because, like, in one aspect, I do like the greater thematic element of, like, focusing on Blazing Saddles, which is, you know, basically focusing on an anti-racism message is fine. I think it works here. Some of the character dynamics work. Like, I think Sarah and Jackson definitely do have some decent chemistry here. There's definitely a lot of meta humor, especially with the way that Hank keeps pointing out, like, the tropes of, like, the samurai genre and the running time, and characters keep getting hit by, like, title cards and stuff like that. That was pretty cute. Especially the animation style, I feel, actually really works here. Like, all the characters have a distinct style that sets them apart. They have a very fun nature where they're perfect for slapstick. I also love, there's a whole series of flashbacks they have here, and the flashbacks are all done in this very kind of, like, bold and dynamic, almost kind of like comic book pointillism style that really kind of work here. Those aspects of the film I like. What I don't like is how it feels like there's so many other aspects of Blazing Saddles that they kind of waste here. Like, I mean, like, you have, like, an amazing cast here. Like you have Michael Cera, you have Samuel L. Jackson, you have George Takei in a little bit of a small supporting role. He basically plays, like, the right hand of, like, the sheriff from, like, Blazing Saddles, and he actually, like, it's Takei. He's pretty cute. I mean, they still get him to do, like, the "oh my" line, because I feel like that's one thing they had to make him say. You have Jaman Hassoun playing Sumo, who's basically the Mongo type character, you know, the dumb muscle who tries to learn his ways. He does okay here. But then you have Michelle Yeoh playing Yuki, who's basically this optimistic woman of this small town, and the film basically wastes her. It barely does anything with her, and like at first you think, okay, is she gonna be employed by Ikachu to be like the beauty, like basically because like in Blazing Saddles they send in Mongo first, and then they send in the German singer, so you feel like okay she's gonna be in that role, but no, she actually isn't, and she doesn't do much of anything. And you can't help but feel like they recorded her at some point doing something similar and then cut that out of the story. And it just made me frustrated. Why would you have Michelle Yeoh, who's going to get a lot more attention this year, and just waste her? And I like, to its credit, yes, I know that this film has been in production hell for the longest time. So, like, because I'm pretty sure they wanted to release this back in 2017. So they've been sitting on it for a while. But still, you just can't help but feel like, man, they wasted Michelle Yeoh in this. They could have done so much with her, and they do nothing. Like, even, like, apparently, like, she looks after, like, this smaller cat who, I think her name is, like, Emiko, and she's supposed to, like, be an aspiring samurai. She gets more to do in this film than Yuki does. And it's, like, it's weird. Also, and just in case it wasn't clear that this is based on Blazing Saddles, you have Mel Brooks playing the shogun of this film. And of course, like, even though he doesn't do as many Blazing Saddles lines, he does like a few, but he also does like bits from other Mel Brooks films. Like at one point he just stares at the camera and says like, "It's good to be the Shogun." So I go back and forth on this film. I mean, I think definitely here's the thing: kids have not seen Blazing Saddles. The kids who are going into this film have not seen Blazing Saddles, but I think going into this with just like the scenes taken out verbatim that they can watch, I feel like it's a good message and it works well enough for this type of film. For adults though, unless the adults really just want to watch Blazing Saddles or like the good parts with their kids, I feel like some of the adults might get a little tired of the repetition of the Blazing Saddles lines. And then the few parts of the humor where it does veer off there, it kind of works in bits and pieces. The meta humor, I feel, works fine. It works okay for this. But then there's, like, simpler slapstick gags where you're kind of like, okay, this is kind of what I expected from this type of film, and I feel like it could do better. But, so, like, I'm deeply on the fence here. I think definitely kids are definitely going to love this more than adults, just because they haven't seen Blazing Saddles, so they're not going to be familiar with all the funny lines here. And there are a lot of great Blazing Saddles moments that they do take from here. And there is a lot of cleverness. I do really like the clever way that they try to bring instant messaging or tweeting into this world, which is corny, but then again, like, it works for this type of film. So I'm very much on the fence here, but I feel like for making Blazing Saddles for kids, it mostly works. It mostly works. What can you say, you know? So yes, you can remake Blazing Saddles. I was actually considering, because I've done a film like it, video essay in the past where I'm like, I don't think you can remake Blazing Saddles just because, and I didn't say like you couldn't remake it because like it would be too woke or something like that. I just think like you couldn't match the same bite that it had. So like, and I mean, because like in a sense, yeah, you could remake Blazing Saddles, but if you tried to make it like exactly the same way, and just kind of like trim it up to be like a little bit more modernly accessible, it might not work. But I think for like Paws Fury, it works really well, and it's actually very, very astute in the way that, you know, like westerns and samurai films are very cyclical. Like they're inspired by the same material. Like you know the deal. Seven Samurai goes into Magnificent Seven, and Yojimbo goes into Fistful of Dollars, and Hidden Fortress goes into Star Wars is a space western, but still you get what's going on here. You see it. So yeah, it's not bad. I'd say Yeah, like if I had to choose between them, between Paws of Fury and League of Super Pets, I definitely say Super Pets would be a good one. But if you really want a good double feature, go with Paws of Fury, which is good. I mean, if you want a good matinee out with the kids, you know. Oh, okay. So this will be a little bit of a trickier one to talk about here. Let's talk about Not Okay. And this is a bit headier to talk about. I will say that. Okay. All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. So, Not Okay is a social media cautionary tale, I guess is the best way to describe it. This is kind of like it's bizarre. It's kind of like a dark comedy that kind of like warns about the dangers of what comes with like online fame, or like that craving to matter in like the online landscape. Like I guess the best way to describe it is just talk about the story. So Zoe Deutsch plays Danny Sanders, and Danny is basically a photojournalist who's struggling to make it as a writer. But she's not. But her writing isn't that good, and she's not as accepted by her coworkers. And you can kind of understand why. Like, she's a little bit lost in her own world. She basically wants to be popular. She basically wants. I think that's the best way to describe it. She wants to be popular and she wants to matter. And it ends up with her kind of like alienating other people with that desire. Like, at one point, she's in the elevator with two of her coworkers. One of them is black and one of them is gay, and she basically says the black person is also gay, so she's like oh, it must be so great to have your little clubs where you get to meet up with all the other gay people. Oh, you guys are lucky. And the moment that she leaves the elevator, of course she's like bitch, what are you doing? So yeah, Danny's immediately a person who, you know, you do not like, and she's kind of egotistical. She's caught up in her own ways. So in order to seem more important and to get more clout on social media, especially since she's trying to get the attention of this influencer, she decides to set up her own little Instagram account where she fakes going to Paris. She's like, oh, I'm in Paris this week for this great writer's workshop. Like, she fakes it. She makes a website and all that. She's like, oh, here I am. And she grabs baguettes from the grocery store and she photoshops backgrounds and all that, and basically tries to fake her entire Paris trip. But that kind of goes awry once there's a terrorist attack in Paris. So everyone is like, oh God, Danny, you're okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. And so basically she fakes her return from Paris and now has to go with the social media narrative that she survived the chaos and is basically like has trauma and is trying to get, you know, basically trying to be brave about it. So of course everyone at the office loves her. They take on her for writing, and her social media accounts blow up. Now, in order to gain more popularity and to seem more genuine, she actually connects with another a person who's gone through trauma, Rowan, who's played by Mia Isaac. And Rowan has gone through a school shooting where her sister was killed during a school shooting, and she's basically like fighting for like gun control as a very heavy-duty activist. Like, she takes her work very seriously. She goes to rallies. She risks her life. She gets very heated and very passionate about what she's talking about. And she can also like sense like Danny doesn't quite have like the same thing that she does. Like, Danny tries so hard to fake, you know, having this trauma. And for the most part, Rowan kind of buys it. But eventually, like, you see where this is going. Eventually, someone is going to discover what happens to her. Now, what I love so much about this film is that there's a dark comedic buildup of it, and I love how it's basically satirizing the social media appeal here by showing off how it's easy to gain the appreciation of social media, but also the ire when all of it comes from an artificiality that you build up within yourself. So basically, you know, to put it bluntly, Danny's a grifter. But she's a grifter for clout. And she basically just chasing that clout the whole time. And you really do not like her. And what I love so much about this film is that you really don't have to like her. Like, I love the fact that this film is set up into different parts, and like they name each chapter of the film. And I love how you get closer towards the end, and one of like the last chapters is called "I Do Not Get a Redemption Arc." And I really like the film kind of like falters. Like there's certain points where like, okay, am I really supposed to care for this character, or are they actually going to learn anything in here? Because like in any, you could sense like this film could really fall flat on its face by the end. Like, it's doing a decent job at portraying like how empty and pathetic like social media chasing can be when it's all based on lies and you're just chasing people who are just as artificial as you. Like, I love the fact that I'm trying to think what the character's name. I think his name was like Colin, who's like an influencer that Danny's trying to get involved with. Who basically, she wants a relationship with this dude. And I love the fact that he keeps talking like yeah, we're hanging, boys, let's go, boys. And at one point, someone calls like, dude, you're from Maine. Just give it a rest already. So I love the fact that it definitely, it's not just like kind of like tongue in cheek, kind of like subtle satire of calling this out. It directly calls it out towards the end of the film. There is no redemption arc for Danny. And I love the fact that when you get to the very end of the film, Danny is shoved out of the picture. Like, Rowan, who has like a much more interesting story to tell and something bigger to fight for and feels betrayed by Danny, actually takes center stage here. Like literally, like there's a moment where Danny has prepared like this big this big forgiveness speech that she wants to give. Say like, I did wrong and I know I can do better, and it doesn't happen because she listens to what Roma has to say on the issue and basically decides that, yeah, I screwed up here and I might have deserved it. Like, she definitely deserves it, but I think the fact that she realized like, okay, I gotta step back because I screwed up here. I feel like that works here. And I love the fact that a lot of the drama feels more genuine. Like, it feels much more reflective of social media culture rather than just kind of like trying to peer in from the outside. Like, in most films that approach like social media would generally have that scene where they're like, oh, we've gone viral, baby, it's the best thing ever, and like having a hit on YouTube, you know the scene. We've all seen it by now. They post that video, everyone loves it. They see the numbers go up and the thumbs up go on the video, and it's like, it's the best thing ever. What could be better than that? And here's a film that says like, well, if you're not really genuine, it's not going to do you much good here. And I love the fact that it calls it out. There's also in the same vein as Free Guy, there's also a few cameos here. Including, I did not expect this, which is a bit of a surprise, and they've kind of revealed it on social media right now, but the Mega 64 characters of Todd and Aaron, who were meant to be like the ridiculous people, like the ridiculous like frat boys, I guess, who always do like end of the year lists, and they're always the most ridiculous things ever, appear in this film as agitators who try to dox Danny. Which is like, it's a brilliant little touch there, and I think like little elements like that remind you that it's a dark comedy, which I think is actually pretty clever, because like it doesn't feel like it's just like, there are a few other YouTubers who they kind of just use them as the YouTubers you would expect, but I think to have like the Mega 64 characters of like Todd and Aaron playing the ridiculous satirical characters that they were, it works so well within this narrative. And like, I kind of went back and forth on this film, because like I would say this, it definitely kept me engaged the whole time. I did want to see Danny's downfall, because it feels so very deserved with how fake she feels throughout all this, where you want to see her tumble hard, and she does. And thankfully, it's not just there's, like I said, there's no redemption arc for her. You're not going to get that moment where she comes up to Ronan and she apologizes, she mends her ways, and everything is nice and happy by the end of the film. There is no happy ending. And that's like probably like the best selling point of this. And I think in general it mostly works. I feel like it meanders a little bit too much with how like Danny gets kind of like lost in her cause here. I feel like it could have done with a few more satirical jabs just to let you know just how detrimental this type of life could be. But for the most part, I feel like it really works for what it's trying to say here. So yeah, not okay is more than okay. Don't put that as a pull quote. I swear to God. Glad to see your view of Not Okay. I was debating on watching this. I think it's definitely worth watching. I mean, it's on Hulu. It's not that long. I think it's like was only like hang on, I have it in my notes here. It's only about 100 minutes. And yeah, it's simply like if you've ever seen like the Mega 64 type deal of Todd and Aaron, those videos, which are absolutely ridiculous, and I love them. It's definitely worth watching for that alone. Sorry there. I was getting a drink of water here for the last film we're going to review, which is probably the best film that we're going to review. No, wait, not that one. That one. Yeah! All right. Let's get the notes up here. Oh, I've been waiting the longest time to talk about this. Now, if you thought Not Okay was good, and you thought Nope was good, oh, baby, you ain't ready for this. You ain't ready for this. All right, let me get my notes up here. Let me run through them, make sure I got them all here. Okay. All right, we're good to go. In 3, 2, 1. So, Crimes of the Future is the latest film from David Cronenberg, and I feel like this is the perfect film for people who have grown comfortable with David Cronenberg. If you've never seen a David Cronenberg film, he's known for doing his body horror type stuff. So you know the very creepy stuff like Scanners and even his son Brandon Cronenberg has done like the same stuff with 2020's Possessor, which is just graphic and violent and sexual. And Crimes of the Future is all of that. While still being a great like crime film. It feels very much like a neo-noir detective film, while at the same time having a lot of that like psychosexual elements of body horror, as well as embracing a lot more of the sci-fi elements. Because I didn't realize it's been a long time since we've had like a David Cronenberg sci-fi film. Like I believe his last one was Existence, which was the one about where people have like a video game console that looks like a pulpy mess of flesh which you plug into your spine, and of course people have like sexual relations with the spine. So Crimes of the Future actually has like an amazing setting. So it takes place in this future where humans have evolved to a point where their pain receptors don't register everything and their bodies can endure a lot more pain. So now if people like get cut or they have their bodies like cut open and stuff like that, it doesn't hurt as much. In fact, it actually feels good. In fact, one of the catchphrases here, which you could actually kind of say is like a continuation of like a Videodrome, is that oh god, I forgot it off the I forgot what the phrase was, but it's basically that pain is the new sex. So basically, people get a lot more turned on in this universe by cutting open their body than they do actually having sex. In fact, at one point, when characters attempt to have like, you know, like sex with just like kissing and stuff like that, they're kind of like, oh, sorry, I'm not actually used to like the old sex, as it were. So naturally, this creates a very different world, and one of the most different aspects of it is the profession of Saul Tenser, played by Viggo Mortensen. Now, Saul is a very interesting person because he has what's known as accelerated evolution syndrome, What this basically means is that his body is growing extra organs that it doesn't need. So he has to have these organs removed regularly. So what does he do with that? He turns it into a performance. Yeah, it's basically like this is a world where performance art is a big deal, and it all involves cutting up the body. So Saul's performances are done by his assistant called Caprice, played by Lia Seydoux. And she uses like this weird like autopsy device that's used for cutting up bodies, but they instead use it for like a big like a big show. It's like I don't know, like you want to like relate back to like something like Nightmare Alley or something like that, where it's kind of like a little bit like a freak show. So basically, Caprice will use this device that kind of looks like a frog with buttons on it. It's so bizarre, to cut open Saul's body, take out organs, and then basically like put them on display like artwork. And everyone watches and videotapes, and they're all like fascinated by this. And then once the performance is over, Saul just like lays back, and they have like his organ displayed by him. He's like, "Hey, how you doing?" Like it's a big art gallery show. So this new world creates a whole bunch of new elements. So now there's a new system set up called the National Organ Registry that is trying to document people like Saul. So the registry is pretty small. It's only made up of about 2 people, Timlin and Whippet. And they're both kind of doing they admit that the work they're doing is a little bit illegal. Like they realize they can't quite film what they're doing here, and they can't quite advocate for what Saul's doing, but they still want to document him and keep track of him because he's basically another evolution in humanity. It's worth noting that Timlin is played by Kristen Stewart, who does an amazing job playing this sort of like anxious and erratic investigator who wants to learn and understand more about people like Saul, but is also very like cautious and very uncertain of how to handle people like Saul. She's like a nervous wreck in the film, but also kind of like you can tell she's very turned on by this whole experience in a weird sort of way. But at the same time, Saul ends up getting pulled into this battle over the body of a child. So this body turns up of a kid who has been born with an ability. Similar to Saul, he has like an evolution where he can consume plastic. And as it turns out, there's more people like this kid. In fact, the kid's father is part of a revolutionary group of people who can eat like toxic plastics. As they refer to it in the film, it's basically these people have learned to adapt to their toxic environment. So like it's the next evolutionary step. So the father is trying to convince Saul to use his autopsy machine to do an autopsy on the kid and reveal this evolutionary state so that it's not covered up by the police. But Saul is conflicted because, like, you're asking us to do an autopsy as a performance on a dead soul without consent. And it's also a kid, which he has a lot of misgivings about. At the same time, there's a detective who's called, no joke, called Detective Cope, played by Welket Bongier. And the detective basically wants Saul to spy on this group and give them valuable information about it. And Saul is essentially caught up in all this, deciding, what do I do? Do I turn these people in, or do I do the autopsy? And even when he makes a choice, finally, after having been deceived throughout the whole film, like, he's definitely being played by so many different people in this, that it's like this, it's weird. Like at first, even when you get caught up on this whole world about like the whole like eating plastic and cutting up organs and all that, and people taking pleasure in like digging blades into their feet and literally having sex scenes where they cut themselves up, even if you get used to all that, there's still like this very, very dense and elaborate story about trying to prevent human evolution in this kind of like this very neo-noir setting. And I love that aspect of it because like it's very much like if you're used to Cronenberg, you're gonna get used to this film really fast. especially for all the great design. I love the kind of like H.R. Giger style psychosexual design of all the contraptions and devices. Like Saul, nothing that Saul owns feels like it's of our world. Like the bed that he sleeps in is kind of like this descending hammock that has all these tendrils and tentacles that connect to his body and make him kind of feel pleasure and pain in weird ways. When he has to eat, which apparently is a rough ordeal for him, he has to sit in this chair that looks like it's entirely made of like bones and spines. And in order for his body to like properly eat, he has to be like jostled and like thrown from like side to side in order so that it'll go down his throat. And here's the thing, I gotta admit this too. Those scenes where Viggo Mortensen is in like the bone chair trying to like eat while like his body is jostled around, he's like struggling to like swallow down his food. That to me was like the most like skin crawling moment where it's like ooh man, that's kind of like one of my worst fears, is like not being able to like swallow something like that and having like your air cut off. And hearing him talk during these scenes, it's just like it's so creepy in a way. And keep in mind, this is a film where people's organs get cut up. Like the autopsy scene they get to is grotesque. You have people literally chopping up body parts. There's one scene where someone has like sewed ears to all different parts of their bodies, and all that. Maybe it's just because I'm kind of used to Cronenberg films, but getting to like the bone chair sequence just made my skin crawl. And that's why I love the film. Like Cronenberg manages to find ways to tap into like the cerebral and grotesque areas of your mind that you didn't know made you feel weird in that way. So like in a sense, like I don't quite want to recommend this as like, if you've never seen a David Cronenberg film, do not jump into this. I would say start with Scanners. That's decent. Maybe a little Videodrome to get used to it, and then maybe it's like a prep. Watch his son's film Possessor just to get more used to like the graphic nature, because I would say this film is not as graphic as Possessor in terms of like the sex and the gore, even though you do see a lot of organs and people's faces being cut up and all that. But surprisingly, this film actually has like little bits and pieces of humor in there, from just like subtle ways to like how they talk about like the old sex, to the more like obvious ways. Like at one point, Saul is trying to like take in one of the performances of people who dabble in kind of like body horror art, and one of them has this whole performance where they're always talking about how we need to listen more in our society. So they basically sewn their eyes shut and they sew like ears all over their body, and they do this little dance. And Saul is just kind of like smirking at it. 'Cause it's like okay, it's all for show though. You know, those ears don't really do anything. They're not really hearing anything, so it feels a little fake. So, whereas everything that Saul does is a part of him. Like he's literally putting himself on display in this and taking parts of his body out and selling them as art, essentially, to a viewing public. So like this film made me feel weird in ways that I didn't expect a Cronenberg film to do. I thought like I'd seen it all with this film, but even after all these years, he still manages to craft a film that works so well at kind of grossing you out, but also kind of turning you on, but also kind of, you know, having that neo-noir edge to it, where it feels like a detective film, which I guess is kind of the best way to describe this film, and why it's so weird and why I love it, is that it's a neo-noir detective film with grotesque bone chairs and organ harvesting and people eating plastic. And it's lovely. What a lovely film. To me, I love how this film is about how social evolutionary regression is torn in the sides of corporations trying to stay afloat and keep up with the changing times. Yeah, and to elaborate on that more, what's even more interesting I like is how the allegiances change with it. Like, because you can sense like the jealousy. Like at one point with like Detective Cope, when he's basically talking about the people who eat plastic, you can tell he's jealous. You can sense the jealousy in his voice there, where he's like, these people can just eat plastic, and it's like nothing to them. It's like, just, you see him throw that rock, and you're just like, God, jealous much, guy? Especially when you see that, like, the organ registry is kind of in league with, like, the registry is not just like a registry, it's like, was it like, it's like a beauty contest, I think? It's weird. There's a little subplot there where it's about like an organ beauty contest, which kind of blindsides you, but it also kind of makes sense for how it shifts from being like a government agency to one of, you know, corporate spectacle, which is just, it's beautiful. Like I said, a very, very rich tapestry that goes on in that film. And it's absolutely astounding. In fact, if I pointed this out earlier, but if you look up on my shelf there, very top, right there, there's Crimes of the Future. I don't usually point that out when I get like press copies like that, but I was just like, that's really excited. It's coming out, I believe the Blu-ray is coming out next week, isn't it? Let me check here. Crimes of the Future. I know it's coming out soon, because I got it early because I really wanted it. But where is it? It is coming out in 2 weeks, actually. Oh, wow. They sent it out really early. Yeah, and you can sense the Ambinish character from like the mother who murders the kid to the well, especially like God, I wish I elaborated on that further in the review, but well, with Caprice, the way that she kind of she wants to matter more and stick out more with her work, and then that backstabbing at the end there, that was brutal, like both in terms of what they do with the drill. And just what ends up happening with like the whole like autopsy. It's just it feels like that. It feels perfectly like a Cronenberg detective film. And I know like one of the things I wanted to elaborate is that it's a sci-fi film, which it very much is. Like you have like weird robotic devices, and you have, like I said, like the H.R. Giger stuff where everything has like coils and tentacles and stuff like that. It wraps around the body. All beautiful, amazingly weird and grotesque stuff, which I love. I kind of flubbed the line there. Was it like pain is the new sex or something like that? Which relates to like if you want to think of it like that, like it's a spiritual successor to Videodrome, where they're like long live the new flesh. Like here's what happened with that flesh. Everyone got used to the pain. And now pain is the new sex. Or the new flesh, rather. I'm getting it confused there. Interesting to note, though, for those who are wondering, Cronenberg actually did make a short film called Crimes of the Future. But I just want to reiterate something here. It's not a remake. Like, the short film has little to nothing to do with this current version of the film. So it's not quite like an update in the same way that like that the other film was. If you want to watch it though, it's on the Criterion channel right now. I think I think it might be on one of the Blu-rays of his films. Kind of like a modern take on Videodrome. Yeah. Actually, yeah. Like if you look at it more at an angle from like how you would approach like social media, the way that people put themselves on display as kind of like a commodity, it actually is. Yeah, it's actually kind of more like a modern day Videodrome, with how people get like addicted to the showmanship of it, especially when it becomes like natural, when it becomes like just part of like the everyday. Because like nowadays, like if you were to go back in time like 20 years and told people about how the world currently functions online with like with social media influencers and YouTubers and all that, it would seem bizarre. And who knows, maybe like within time, like our bodies will have some sort of evolutionary take that'll go that route. Probably not as crazy as us eating plastic. You might get to that point. I don't know, maybe a microplastic commentary in there, but for the most part, you know. Yeah. But yeah, it's a I would definitely, now that I think about it, I would have to double feature it with Videodrome, just to seek all the parallels, which I actually have over. I think it's hidden behind my Mad Max art book over there, but I do have Videodrome on the Criterion Collection. But yeah, Cronenberg's works are just amazing, and I was so happy that his son Brandon Cronenberg did an amazing job with Possessor, which means that we're gonna get a continuing legacy of creepy, weird, transhumanism, body horror type films, which are great. Which is amazing because like Possessor was also in the same league as having that sci-fi element, which worked really well. So, oh my goodness, almost a positive take on Soylent Green as well. Kinda, yeah. You can't help but wonder, like that would actually be an interesting idea. Like, what would happen if you continued on with Soylent Green, where everyone knew that they were eating people within that scenario, and it just kept going from there? That would actually be a much more interesting film. All I'm saying is, like, when we do get to a point where we're tapping Soylent Green for a remake, make it a sequel. Like, I know we can't do, like, we don't have like a modern day Charlton Heston to pass it off on, but make it a sequel. Make it in a world where we already know that we're eating people. I think that'd be way more interesting. A lot of fun. Okay, so what do we got coming up in the next week? Okay, so a little bit of a rundown. What do we got coming up here? I don't like. We're coming up on August. And August is kind of a weird time. Like, August is a great time for sleeper films. Films you don't expect to be good. I know the film I got next week is Bullet Train. So we'll be reviewing that at some point. There's a few other smaller films. I missed Vengeance this week. I'm going to try to see if I can see Vengeance eventually, but I'll try to catch up with that. I think there's a few smaller films that are going to be coming out this year. But aren't we coming up on we're coming up on like what's considered like the snow day of the box office, so can't really expect too many big films. Despite the fact that Shang-Chi last year was a huge surprise for that. But I don't know how Lightning will repeat then. So let's do before I do that, before I go through the rundown of everything we did, I just want to mention that I am going to be at a convention coming up here. I'm going to be appearing at before I forget it, yes, I'm glad you reminded me, Sug. I do actually have a screener for Prey. I have seen it. I have, but the embargo is set for August 4th, I want to say. It's definitely like sometime mid next week. But yes, I have seen Prey. I can't say anything about it yet, but it's coming up. Don't worry about it. And, oh yeah, and Bodies. I forgot about that one too. I keep forgetting about. I've had like a little bit of hype for that film for a while, but it feels like it kind of like came and died off a little bit. And I think that's just because I've been so busy with everything else. But yeah, like I was saying, I'm going to be appearing at the Convergence 2022, which will be on August 11th through that Sunday, I believe, on the 14th. And I'm going to be paneling there all day. I'm one of like the also appearing guests there, which basically means my name is there, and that I'm going to be doing book signings, all that. So I'll be there. I'll be talking about movies, writing. What am I going to talk about? Rotten Tomatoes. I'll be talking a lot about horror movies. I'll be talking about neurodivergence and Star Trek, and then just partying. Like, I'll only be doing like 2 to 3 panels a day there, and then just be partying and hanging out with everyone. So if you're in the Twin Cities area and you want to have a lot of fun, come to Convergence. We have a lot of fun there. and I always have fun there. So I'm greatly looking forward to that. Okay, so before we go, yes, I mentioned Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I'm excited for Prey. We'll definitely review, and Bullet Train we'll definitely review. Or wait, was it Bullet Train? I feel like I'm missing something. No, it was Bullet Train. Okay, good. I thought it'd be something else. Okay, so quick recap of what we reviewed here. Nope. Jordan Peele's new sci-fi horror film. It really, really, really works. It's probably my favorite Jordan Peele film so far. Great commentary on horror films, viewers, and the sense of control that we assert over films. Yeah, and I'll just do like ratings everyone wants. I'm like 4.5 out of 5 stars for that. DC League of Super Pets. A fun, cute version of like DC Comics characters. It has a little bit of fun here and there. Takes a while to get going, but it has great thematic core. 3 out of 5. Not Okay, a social media kind of dark comedy, cautionary tale. It takes a while to find its footing, but by the end it really does work and makes a great commentary on how weird and messed up social media networks are. So 3.5 out of 5 stars. Paws of Fury, fun little Blazing Saddles remake. It gets a little tiring here and there when it does verbatim scenes, but kids haven't seen Blazing Saddles, so this is a decent introduction for them. 3 out of 5 stars. And Crimes of the Future, David Cronenberg does a great neo-noir film with lots of body horror, torture, and grotesque stuff that still kind of makes me puke. And I gotta give him credit for that, so 4.5 out of 5 stars. Yeah, those conventions are good. I don't really do a horrors of anime panel there just because it's a little bit tricky to convince him to do something like that. Also, I think they horrors of anime plays better at horror conventions. Sorry, not horror conventions, anime conventions. Gotta convince it. But I will try to be at Anime Detour next year with a new cut of the horrors of anime. I always try to bring a new weird smash cut of bad anime every time I go. So we'll get all that. I'll post these reviews sometime next week, and we'll try to do a review stream, if not next week, then the week after that, where we will definitely be covering Prey and Bullet Train for sure. I'll try to see if I can get Screener of Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. But we'll eventually get there. So, my name is Martin McPherson. You can find my works at filminquiry.com, twincitiesgeek.com, movieswithmark.com, visualcult.com, I believe it's called, cinemaparadiso.co.uk, and probably a few other websites. Whatever. But yeah, be sure to check in on this channel. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, we did get a new membership that happened today. Let me congratulate them on Jesu23. Thank you for your membership. And everyone, thank you for stopping by. Sucked, you're always great to have on the stream. Mr. T, great talking to you again. Actual Fandom, thank you so much for stopping by. Glad that you took time out of your day to stop by. And basically everyone, have a great weekend. I gave you a lot of great recommendations of stuff to see out there right now. I'll catch you next time. So until then, Mega Force.